The war room of Thornhaven Palace had witnessed 3 centuries of strategic decisions. Its stone walls bore the marks of history, scorch marks from battles long concluded, claw marks from alphas who had argued with more than words, and the faint metallic scent of blood that no amount of cleaning could ever fully erase. The chamber existed beneath the palace proper, carved from living rock when the first werewolf kings had claimed these mountains as their dominion. Here, in this space where secrets were currency and trust was measured in blood, the fate of kingdoms had always been decided. Tonight would be no different. King Brennan Ashcroft stood at the head of the ancient oak table, his hands pressed flat against wood that had been polished smooth by the palms of his ancestors. The map spread before him depicted the Northern Territories in meticulous detail, every pack boundary marked, every contested region shaded in colors that represented complex allegiances built over generations. To a human eye, it would have appeared to be a simple geographical representation. To those gathered in this room, it was a battlefield rendered in ink and parchment, and the territory they were losing was marked in red, too much red. The 11 men seated around that table represented what remained of Brennan's inner circle. Not the full council, that bloated assembly of minor nobles and territorial representatives who spoke much and decided little. These were the wolves who commanded forces, who controlled resources, who held the loyalty of packs that could tip the balance between stability and chaos. These were the men Brennan needed to convince, or failing that, to control. Marcus Thornhart sat at Brennan's right hand, as he had for 20 years. The king's beta and oldest friend, a wolf whose loyalty had been tested in ways that would have broken lesser men. His face bore the scars of countless battles, a network of white lines across dark skin that told stories of survival against impossible odds. His eyes, amber and unblinking, tracked every movement in the room with the vigilance of a soldier who had seen too many allies become enemies without warning. To the left sat Lord Corvus Nightshade, head of the Regent Council, a position that had grown far too powerful during the years following Queen Alara's death. He was older than the king by 2 decades, his hair gone silver, his face carved into an expression of perpetual disapproval. He wore the formal robes of his office, black silk embroidered with silver thread in patterns that represented his family's ancient lineage. His fingers, long and pale, drummed against the table in a rhythm that spoke of impatience barely contained. General Thane Blackwater commanded the palace guard and the standing forces that protected the heart of the kingdom. He was massive even by werewolf standards, his shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, his hands capable of crushing stone. He had served Brennan's father before him, had trained Brennan himself in the arts of combat and war. His presence should have been reassuring. It was not. The others represented the major packs within the Southern Territories. Lord Aldrich of the Mountain Packs, whose wolves controlled the strategic passes through the eastern ranges. Lady Moira of the Forest Clans, one of the few females to command pack loyalty in her own right. Commander Reeves of the Border Patrols, whose forces stood between civilization and the wilderness beyond. Each one necessary, each one potentially treacherous. Brennan had learned, in the 2 years since his mate's death, that power created its own form of isolation. The stronger you became, the more dangerous your allies, because only the dangerous could help you, and only the ambitious would try. He straightened from the map and let his gaze sweep across the assembled wolves. In the torchlight that flickered from iron sconces mounted on the walls, his eyes gleamed gold, the mark of royal blood, the genetic legacy that made him more than simply another alpha. His face showed the weathering of 35 years, the last 2 of which had carved lines deeper than his age would suggest. His dark hair, longer than military fashion would dictate, was pulled back from features that could have been handsome if they had ever learned to smile again. When Brennan finally spoke, his voice carried the particular quality that made other wolves instinctively straighten in their seats. Not loud. Volume was the refuge of the insecure, but deep, resonant, the kind of voice that seemed to vibrate in the chest of everyone who heard it. 3 packs have stopped answering to the throne. The statement hung in the air like an executioner's blade. No one moved, no one dared. The Blood Moon Pack, the Iron Ridge Pack, the Northern Star Pack. Brennan's finger touched each territory on the map as he named them. Combined population of 15,000 wolves, Combined military strength of 3,000 trained fighters. Combined territory encompassing 1/3 of our northern border. Lord Corvus cleared his throat. A wet, rattling sound. Surely, Your Majesty, this is simply a matter of poor communication. The northern territories have always been difficult to govern, given their distance from Thornhaven. Perhaps if we sent an envoy with proper credentials and adequate escort— I sent 3 envoys, Brennan interrupted, his tone unchanged. None returned. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Killing an envoy was not simply an insult. It was a declaration of war, recognized as such by every pack law that had governed werewolf society since the first alphas had carved territories from contested land. Marcus leaned forward, his voice a low growl. When? The first disappeared 6 weeks ago. The second, 4 weeks. The third was found 3 days past, his body left at our northern border as message. They took his head, but left his heart pinned to his chest with an iron spike. The old way of declaring blood feud. And you're only telling us now? Lord Aldrich's voice carried accusation wrapped in carefully measured respect. Brennan's eyes found the Mountain Lord across the length of the table. I'm telling you when I'm ready to tell you, Aldrich. Or have you forgotten who wears the crown? The challenge was unmistakable. Lord Aldrich held the king's gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away. The submission was fractional, barely perceptible, but everyone in the room felt it. This was the hierarchy that governed their kind. Eye contact was dominance. Looking away was acknowledgement of superior power. My spies in the Northern Territories report mobilization, Brennan continued. Training exercises, stockpiling supplies, the kind of preparations armies make when they're planning to march. March where? Lady Moira asked, though the answer was obvious. Here. General Thane's voice was like stones grinding together. They'll march on Thornhaven, test the king's resolve. But you've been king for 7 years, Corvus said, and there was no missing the criticism in his tone. Forgive my bluntness, Your Majesty, but some might say the kingdom has lacked firm guidance since Queen Alara's passing. The packs see uncertainty. They see a throne that hesitates. The accusation would have meant death from anyone else. From Corvus, it was simply the calculated honesty of a man who believed his position made him untouchable. Perhaps he was right. Marcus's hand moved toward the blade at his belt, but Brennan's slight gesture stopped him. The king's expression had not changed. His voice remained level. You speak plainly, Lord Corvus. I appreciate plain speech. He paused, and something shifted in his eyes, something harder than sorrow, colder than memory. Yes, I withdrew after my mate died. Yes, I left governance to my council while I dealt with matters of the heart. But that time is ending. He placed both hands on the map, leaning forward so that every man in the room could see his face clearly in the torchlight. The northern packs march on Thornhaven because they believe I am diminished. They believe that without Queen Alara to bridge the gap between north and south, this kingdom will fracture along old fault lines. They are testing whether I have the strength to hold what my bloodline has held since the first Ashcroft took this mountain and made it a throne. And do you? Corvus asked, and the question carried the weight of genuine inquiry rather than challenge. Brennan smiled then, but it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a wolf who had decided that running was over and the hunt was about to begin. I held the eastern border against the vampire clans for 3 years before I took the throne. I fought in 17 major engagements and lost none of them. I killed my first enemy when I was 16 years old. I am my father's son, Lord Corvus, and my father built this kingdom through strategy and strength in equal measure. I have spent 2 years in mourning, yes, but I have not spent them sleeping. He straightened, and the movement seemed to fill the room with his presence. While you all conducted the business of governance, I was reading reports. While you assumed I had abandoned my duties, I was analyzing supply routes and territorial vulnerabilities. I was planning for exactly this moment, because I knew it would come. Power abhors a vacuum, and I created one deliberately. Now we see who was foolish enough to step into it. What do you propose? General Thane asked, and there was approval in his voice now, the satisfaction of a warrior recognizing another warrior's awakening. We have 2 weeks before they march, Brennan said. Maybe 3 if the weather turns against them. That's time enough. Time enough for what? Lady Moira's eyes narrowed. To remind every pack in these territories why the Ashcroft bloodline has ruled these mountains since the age of the first kings. Brennan's finger traced a line on the map, connecting points that formed a strategic pattern. We reinforce the northern approaches here, here, and here. We pull the garrison from the western fort. It's redundant now that we have peace with the mountain clans. We activate the reserve forces, every wolf between 18 and 50 who has combat training. We recall the hunting parties from the frontier. We arm the civilian population in the border towns. That's conscription, Corvus said, his voice tight. The people won't accept it willingly. The people will accept it or they'll burn when the northern packs come south, Brennan replied flatly. I'm not asking them to celebrate. I'm commanding them to survive. He pulled a sealed document from inside his jacket and placed it on the table. The wax seal bore the royal crest, already stamped, already official. This is a declaration of martial law in the northern third of the kingdom. It takes effect at dawn. All pack alphas in the affected regions report directly to General Thane. All resources are subject to military requisition. All disputes are settled by military tribunal. We become a kingdom preparing for war, because we are a kingdom at war. The full council will never approve this, Corvus said, but his protest sounded hollow even to himself. The full council, Brennan said with infinite patience, serves at my pleasure, Lord Corvus. They advise. I decide. That is the structure of our governance, established by my ancestors and unchanged in 300 years. Corvus's face flushed, but he held his tongue. I want a full accounting of our military strength by dawn, Brennan continued, addressing the room at large. Numbers, not estimates, equipment status, supply reserves, strategic weaknesses. I want to know everything the northern packs know about us, and then I want to know what they don't know. And our strategy, Your Majesty? Lord Aldrich asked. Do we meet them in the field or make them come to us? Neither. Brennan's smile returned, sharper this time. We make them think we're unprepared, let them overextend their supply lines, and then we cut them to pieces so completely that no one will question my authority for another generation. Marcus spoke for the first time since the meeting began, his voice carrying the weight of long friendship. That's a dangerous game. If they breach our outer defenses, they won't. Brennan's certainty was absolute. Because I'm not going to be sitting behind these walls while my soldiers do the fighting. I'll be leading them myself. That got their attention. Every head in the room turned toward him. Explain, Corvus demanded. The northern packs march because they believe I'm broken. I need to prove otherwise, but not by hiding in my palace while my generals win my battles. I need to be visible. I need to remind every wolf in this kingdom that their king is still a warrior. You're talking about taking the field personally, General Thane said, and there was concern in his voice now. Your Majesty, if you should fall, then Marcus becomes regent until my daughter comes of age, and the kingdom continues as it always has. But I won't fall. Brennan's voice carried the iron certainty of prophecy. I can't afford to. My daughter needs a father, not a memory. At the mention of his daughter, something changed in the room's atmosphere. The political calculations gave way, briefly, to something more human. Several of the assembled wolves had children of their own. They understood what it meant to balance duty against love, service against family. The princess, Lady Moira said carefully, she should be moved to safety. If there's any possibility of the enemy reaching Thornhaven, she leaves tonight, Brennan said. I've arranged for her to be relocated beyond the reach of any threat, somewhere secure. Where? Corvus asked sharply. That information remains with me and my beta, Marcus cut in before Brennan could answer. For the princess's protection. Corvus's eyes narrowed, but he nodded acceptance. In truth, he had no choice. The royal family's safety was the king's sole prerogative, recognized by every law and custom that governed their society. What Brennan didn't tell them, what he couldn't tell them, was that the threat to his daughter had nothing to do with the northern packs. The real danger lived much closer, wore noble clothing, and sat in council meetings planning treason. He had discovered the truth 3 days ago. A servant girl, one who had been loyal to his father's household, had come to Marcus in the dead of night with information she'd overheard while cleaning the regent chambers. A conversation between Corvus and General Thane about the inconvenience of the princess, about how governance would be simpler if the king were to suffer an accident during the coming conflict and the regency were to extend indefinitely, about how a child could be controlled, shaped, made useful until she became more liability than asset, about how that liability would eventually need to be eliminated. Brennan had listened to Marcus relay this information with a calm that surprised even himself. He had smiled at his oldest friend and said simply, "Then we give them what they expect: a distracted king, a vulnerable daughter, an opportunity for treachery that will draw them into the open where they can be dealt with permanently." The meeting continued for another hour, details hammered out, assignments distributed, contingencies planned. When it finally concluded and the assembled wolves filed out of the war room, only Marcus remained. The beta waited until the last footstep had faded before speaking. "You're certain about Corvus and Thane?" The servant heard them discuss my mate's death, how the wolfsbane took longer than expected to kill her because Alara kept fighting it, how they were relieved when she finally died. Brennan's voice cracked on the last word, the first real emotion he'd shown all evening. "She died protecting this kingdom from a threat I was too blind to see, and I failed her." "You see it now," Marcus said quietly. "That's what matters. I see it too late for Alara, but not too late for Mira. What do you need me to do?" "Take my daughter out of the palace tonight. Use the old passages, the ones only the royal family knows. I've arranged for a carriage at the eastern postern gate. You'll escort her personally to a place of safety." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "You're trusting me with the princess's life, but not her location?" "I'm trusting you with both, but I can't risk the destination being overheard, even here." Brennan moved to a small chest in the corner of the war room, removed a sealed letter, and handed it to his beta. "Read this when you're clear of the palace. It contains detailed instructions. Follow them exactly." Marcus took the letter, studying his king's face. "How long will she be away?" "As long as necessary. Until every traitor is dead and every threat is neutralized. Until I can bring her home to a palace that's truly safe. And if something happens to you, then you raise her as your own. Teach her what it means to lead. Make sure she understands that being royal means serving the people, not ruling them." Brennan gripped his friend's shoulder. "But nothing will happen to me, Marcus. I'm going to survive this, expose the conspirators, and show every pack in these territories what happens when you mistake mourning for weakness." "When do I take her?" "Now. She's in her chambers with her nurse. Tell the woman nothing. Just take Mira and go. I'll handle the explanations tomorrow." Marcus nodded once, a warrior's acknowledgement of orders received. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "She's stronger than you think. Your daughter. She has her mother's spirit." "I know," Brennan said softly. "That's the only reason I can bear to let her go." In the royal chambers 3 floors above the war room, Princess Mira Ashcroft sat with her nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, who had cared for her since shortly after her mother's death. The child was supposed to be sleeping, but sleep had become difficult in recent months. The palace at night was full of sounds that her young, sensitive ears could hear too clearly. Footsteps in corridors that should have been empty. Voices whispering just beyond normal hearing. The sense that something was fundamentally wrong in her home, even if she couldn't articulate exactly what. She was drawing, as she often did when sleep wouldn't come. Her current picture showed a family, simple figures holding hands. A tall figure representing her father, a smaller one representing herself. And in between, sketched in lighter charcoal, as if uncertain of its right to exist, a female figure she labeled in careful letters, Mama. Mira was small for her 5 years, with a tangle of dark hair that resisted her nurse's best efforts at taming, and eyes that gleamed gold in the lamplight. She had her father's coloring and her mother's delicate features, a combination that made every person who looked at her remember the queen who had died too young. She understood more than adults realized. Children always did. She knew that her father had changed after Mama died, that he spent his days locked away dealing with matters too important for a child. She knew that the caregivers who attended her were sometimes harsh when they thought no one was watching, that they spoke about her as if she were a burden rather than a person. She knew that she was often alone in a palace full of people, and that loneliness was a cold thing that no fire could warm. "Sarah?" she asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Yes, little one? Will Papa come say goodnight?" The nurse's hands paused in their knitting. "Your father is very busy tonight, Mira. Important meetings." "He's always busy." The child's voice was matter-of-fact rather than accusing. She had learned not to expect things that wouldn't happen. Before Sarah could formulate a response, there was a soft knock at the chamber door. The nurse set aside her knitting and moved to answer it, positioning herself between the door and Mira in an instinctive gesture of protection. Marcus Thornhart stood in the corridor, his expression grave but kind. "The king requires his daughter," he said simply. "There's no time for questions. Dress her warmly for travel, now." Sarah's eyes widened. "Travel? At this hour? Where?" "No questions," Marcus repeated firmly. "Warm clothes, quickly." Mira had already risen from her drawing table and moved to stand beside her nurse. She looked up at Marcus with eyes that held more awareness than her years should have permitted. "Is Papa sending me away?" she asked. Marcus knelt so he was at her eye level, a gesture of respect between equals. "Your father is protecting you, Princess. Do you understand the difference?" She considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Like when Mama used to send me to the gardens when the council meetings got loud. She said it was protecting my ears from grown-up words." "Exactly like that," Marcus said gently. "Your father needs to deal with very loud grown-up matters. He's sending you somewhere quiet and safe until it's finished." "Will he come get me himself?" "He swore it to me personally, a king's oath." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she turned to Sarah and said, "I need my traveling dress, the blue one." 20 minutes later, Mira was dressed in practical traveling clothes, a warm cloak wrapped around her small frame, her favorite doll clutched in one hand. Sarah had tried to argue, tried to insist on proper protocols, but Marcus had been immovable. The king's orders were absolute, and he would not be delayed. They moved through the palace using passages that few residents knew existed. The secret ways that allowed royal families to flee in times of crisis. Narrow corridors carved into the stone itself during the palace's original construction. The walls were bare rock here, lit by torches placed at irregular intervals. Their footsteps echoed softly. Mira walked between Marcus and Sarah, small and brave and uncertain in equal measure. She wanted to ask more questions, but something in Marcus's focused silence told her that questions would not be welcomed. So she walked and stayed quiet, and tried to be worthy of her mother's memory. They emerged from the passages into the cold night air near a small postern gate that most people had forgotten existed. A covered carriage waited there, driver already in position, 2 horses stamping and snorting in the autumn chill. As Marcus lifted Mira into the carriage, she finally broke her silence. "Will I see Papa before I go?" Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "He's dealing with urgent matters, but he asked me to give you something." He handed her a small wooden box, carved with intricate wolf designs. Inside was a ring, her mother's ring, the one Queen Alara had worn every day of her married life. Gold set with a moonstone that seemed to glow with its own light. "He said," Marcus continued, his voice gentle, "that your mother would want you to have this, that you should remember you are her daughter, brave and clever and strong." Mira's small fingers closed around the ring, her eyes suddenly wet. "I don't feel strong." "No one ever does," Marcus said. "Strength isn't about feeling fearless. It's about doing what must be done even when you're frightened. Your mother understood that. So does your father. And so will you." He handed the sealed letter Brennan had given him to the driver, a man he had known for 20 years, a wolf whose loyalty to the throne was absolute. "You have your orders. Follow them exactly. The princess's safety depends on it." The driver nodded grimly and tucked the letter inside his coat. Marcus stepped back, and the carriage lurched into motion, carrying the princess away from the only home she had ever known. Sarah held Mira as she cried quietly, rocking her gently, making soothing sounds that meant both nothing and everything. The journey would take 3 days by carriage, following roads that wound through increasingly rural territory, moving from werewolf lands into the borderlands where human settlements began to dominate. The destination was a small town called Willowmere, unremarkable and easily overlooked, exactly the kind of place no one would think to search for a princess. But Marcus, watching the carriage disappear into the darkness, already knew what would happen. Had read the sealed letter while the driver prepared the horses. Had seen Brennan's contingency plan, and recognized both its brilliance and its risk. The princess would not reach Willowmere in the carriage. Somewhere along the road, circumstances would force a change of plans. The driver had orders to abandon the carriage at the first sign of pursuit, to scatter the escort, to make it appear that the princess had been taken by hostile forces, and Mira, frightened and alone, would flee on foot toward the only safe haven within reach, would run with a child's instinct toward people and shelter, would find her way to Willowmere's market square exactly when her father needed her there. It was manipulation of the most calculated kind, using his own daughter's fear to create a situation that would serve his larger strategy. But it was also protection, in the only way a king under siege could provide it. Marcus made his way back through the secret passages, back to the war room where Brennan still stood over his maps. The beta found his king exactly as he'd left him, hands pressed flat against the ancient oak, studying territories and supply lines and the geometry of coming war. "It's done," Marcus said simply. Brennan didn't look up. How was she? Frightened, confused. But she trusts you, even when she doesn't understand. That's a precious thing. I know. Brennan's finger traced a route on the map, the path the carriage would take toward Willowmere. 3 days by carriage, but she'll arrive sooner. Events will force her hand. You're certain this will work? No, but I'm certain that keeping her here would get her killed. This way she has a chance. Hidden in plain sight, protected by someone who has no stake in werewolf politics, beyond the reach of conspirators who won't think to look in human territories. He looked up finally, meeting Marcus's eyes. I'm gambling my daughter's life on a stranger's decency. It's the worst decision I've ever made, and the only one I can live with. The woman in Willowmere, you're sure about her? Iris Whitmore, daughter of my father's royal physician. She left court after her parents died in the Purge, returned to her family's apothecary in Willowmere. She's skilled, intelligent, and has every reason to hate werewolf politics. Brennan's expression was grim, which makes her exactly the kind of person who might help a frightened child, even knowing the risk. And if she refuses, she won't. Brennan's certainty was absolute. I've read the reports. She treats sick children for free when their parents can't pay. She tends wounded travelers without asking questions. She's a healer down to her bones, Marcus. When my daughter runs to her crying for help, she won't be able to turn away. It's not in her nature. He moved to the window, looking out at the palace grounds below. Somewhere out there, his daughter was traveling toward an uncertain fate. Somewhere out there, his enemies were planning his death. And here he stood, moving pieces on a board that would soon run red with blood. The northern packs will march within 2 weeks, he said. Corvus will use the chaos to make his move against me. Thane will arrange my accident on the battlefield. They expect the kingdom to fall into their hands like fruit from a rotting tree. And instead? Instead, they'll learn what happens when you mistake a king's mourning for a king's defeat. Brennan turned from the window, his golden eyes hard as stone. I've given them 2 years to grow comfortable. 2 years to build their conspiracy. 2 years to believe I'm diminished. Now I show them the truth. He moved back to the map, placing markers with decisive precision. Send word to our true allies in the outer packs. Tell them to prepare. Tell them the king remembers his friends and will remember his enemies. Tell them that anyone who stands with the Northern Rebellion will be destroyed so completely that their bloodlines will be forgotten. Marcus bowed his head in acknowledgement and left to carry out his orders. Alone again, Brennan returned his attention to the map, but his mind was on a small carriage traveling through the night, carrying the most precious thing in his world toward a destiny he had carefully arranged but could not control. He thought about Mira's face, the way she looked at him with her mother's eyes, the questions in her expression that he had no time to answer. He thought about the years of distance between them, the damage his mourning had caused, the trust he had lost and needed to rebuild. And he made a vow, silent but absolute. When this was over, when the traitors were dead and the kingdom was secure, he would earn back her love. He would prove he could be the father she deserved. He would show her that her mother's sacrifice had meaning. But first, he had a war to win and enemies to destroy. The game was in motion. The pieces were positioned. And King Brennan Ashcroft, for the first time since his mate's death, felt the cold clarity of purpose that had once made him the most feared warrior in the Northern Territories. The mourning was done. Now came the reckoning. The market square of Willowmere existed in a state of controlled chaos that had persisted for generations. Every 7th day, the small human settlement transformed from a collection of quiet streets and modest homes into a sprawling maze of commerce and conversation. Farmers brought vegetables still dusted with earth from morning harvest. Craftsmen displayed wares that represented months of careful labor. Traveling merchants offered goods from distant territories, exotic items that most residents would never see except during these weekly gatherings. Iris Whitmore had been attending this market since before she could walk. First carried in her mother's arms, then toddling beside her father as he purchased supplies for the apothecary that had been in their family for 4 generations. Now, at 27 years of age, she managed that shop alone. Her parents had died within a year of each other when she was barely into her 20s, victims of a political purge that had swept through the werewolf territories, consuming anyone connected to the old regime. Collateral damage, they called it, as if calling murder by a gentler name made it acceptable. Iris had survived because she was young, because she was human, because she was beneath the notice of those who were eliminating threats to the new king's power. She had returned to Willowmere with her medical knowledge and the absolute conviction that she would never again involve herself in werewolf politics. That resolution had lasted 7 years. It was about to end. She stood behind her stall now, arranging bottles of tincture and bundles of dried herbs with practiced efficiency. The autumn air carried the promise of early winter, and her inventory reflected seasonal needs: remedies for coughs and fever, preparations for joint pain, the salves and potions that kept rural people functional when physicians were expensive and far away. Her stall occupied a prime position near the market center, earned through years of fair dealing and effective medicine. People trusted her. They brought their children when sickness struck. They sought her counsel for ailments both physical and sometimes, whispered in confidence, matters of the heart. She was known for her gentleness, her patience, her genuine care. What people did not know was that beneath that gentle exterior lay the tactical mind her father had trained. A royal physician's daughter learned to read power dynamics the way other children learned letters. She had grown up watching her father navigate court intrigue, understanding that the wrong word to the wrong person could mean death. That education had saved her life when the purge began. She had known to run, known where to hide, known how to disappear. And she had known with absolute certainty that she would never put herself in that position again. The morning passed in familiar rhythms. Customers came and went. Coins changed hands. Iris answered questions about dosage and application, offered advice freely, because healing was not something to be hoarded. A farmer's wife sought remedy for her husband's persistent cough. A young mother needed something for her infant's teething pain. An elderly man required salve for joints that ached with changing weather. Ordinary problems with ordinary solutions. This was the life she had chosen. She was reorganizing her display after a busy hour, when movement at the market's edge caught her attention. A ripple in the crowd, people stepping aside with the particular urgency that announced something unusual approaching. The child burst through the crowd like a hunted animal. She was running with the desperate speed of prey fleeing a predator, her small legs carrying her with surprising agility as she dodged between adult bodies. Perhaps 5 years old, small even for her age, with a wild tangle of dark hair and clothes that were well made but dirty and torn, as if she had been traveling rough for days. But it was her eyes that captured Iris's attention. Golden eyes, bright and terrified, gleaming with the unmistakable mark of werewolf blood. Iris's medical training cataloged details automatically. The child's breathing was labored, but not dangerously so. Her color was good despite obvious exhaustion. Scratches on her arms and face from running through brush. Feet wrapped in cloth that had once been part of a dress. Improvised shoes for someone who had fled without proper preparation. No visible serious injuries, but clear signs of prolonged exposure and inadequate food. This child had been running for days, not hours. Had been surviving on instinct and desperation, alone in territory that should have killed someone so young and vulnerable. The girl's trajectory brought her directly to Iris's stall. She didn't slow, didn't hesitate, simply threw herself against the woman's legs with force that nearly knocked them both over. Small arms wrapped around Iris's waist with desperate strength. The child pressed her face against the apron Iris wore, making sounds somewhere between sobs and the whimpering of a frightened animal. Iris's response was instinctive. Her arms came up to embrace the trembling child, one hand stroking the tangled hair in gestures meant to soothe. Her body positioned itself between the girl and whatever she was fleeing, a protective stance adopted without conscious decision. She did not know this child, had no reason to involve herself in werewolf business. But the vulnerability of the small creature clinging to her triggered something that transcended survival strategies. The girl was trying to speak through her sobs, words emerging garbled but comprehensible if you listened carefully. "Hide me. The child begged, her voice raw from crying and thirst. "Please hide me. They're coming. Bad men are coming. They want to hurt Papa. I heard them talking about it. Please, please hide me." The words tumbled out desperately. This child was running from someone. She believed her father's life was in danger. She thought hiding was the only solution. Iris made her decision in the space between heartbeats. It was foolish. It was dangerous. It violated every principle of self-preservation she had adopted. But some instincts ran deeper than survival. She gathered the child into her arms with strength her slender frame somehow found. The girl was lighter than she should be, evidence of days without adequate food. Iris deposited her into the large wicker basket beneath her display table, where excess inventory was stored. She covered the child with a heavy cloth intended to protect merchandise from afternoon sun, arranging the fabric to conceal while still allowing air. Her movements were quick but not frantic, efficient but not obviously suspicious. Years of palace training had taught her that panic drew attention, while calm competence allowed you to hide in plain sight. She had barely straightened when the crowd at the market's edge began to part again, this time with even greater urgency. The wolves who emerged were clearly royal guard. Their bearing and coordination marked them as elite fighters. They wore dark gray livery that Iris recognized with a sinking sensation. Those colors belonged to the king's personal household. They spread through the market with practiced efficiency, their movements systematic as they scanned faces and examined hiding places. Vendors froze. Customers found pressing reasons to study the ground. This was the effect werewolf authority had on human settlements. Instant, instinctive submission. Behind the soldiers came a figure that made Iris's breath catch. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath traveling clothes that could not disguise the power they covered. His dark hair was pulled back from features that might have been handsome if they had not been set in such controlled intensity. His eyes, when they swept across the market square, gleamed gold with the mark of royal blood. This was no ordinary alpha. The deference his own soldiers showed, the quality of his presence, the fact that someone of obvious high rank would personally conduct such a search, all pointed to one identity: King Brennan Ashcroft himself. Iris felt the child shift slightly in the basket beneath her table, pressing deeper into the concealing fabric. The movement was minimal, barely perceptible, but werewolf senses were acute. She found herself holding her breath, terrified that supernatural perception would detect what human eyes would miss. The king's gaze swept across the market with methodical precision. He was not simply looking, he was hunting. There was a difference, and Iris recognized it from watching her father diagnose complex ailments. This was someone who knew exactly what they sought and would not be satisfied without finding it. His attention found her stall. For a moment that stretched into eternity, his golden eyes met hers across the distance. Something flickered in those depths, some assessment she could not interpret. Then he was moving toward her with steps that devoured space with frightening efficiency. The soldiers adjusted positions, following their king while maintaining their search. But the focus had narrowed. The hunt had found its target. Iris watched him approach and tried desperately to school her features into innocent curiosity rather than guilty terror. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Her palms were sweating despite the autumn chill. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running would confirm guilt. The king stopped before her stall, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was perhaps only a few years older than herself, but he carried authority as if born wearing it. His face showed the marks of recent stress, lines carved deeper than his years would suggest. When he spoke, his voice was deep and carefully controlled. "I'm searching for a child, a girl of 5 years with dark hair and golden eyes. She would have arrived in Willowmere within the past day or two. Have you seen her?" The description matched the creature hidden beneath Iris's table with precision that eliminated any possibility of coincidence. This was a test, and her answer would determine everything. The lie emerged with surprising smoothness. Years since leaving court had not dulled her ability to dissemble. "I've been focused on my customers, Your Majesty," she said, keeping her tone respectful but not servile. "The market is crowded and chaotic as it always is on trading days. Children pass through constantly without my particular notice." She paused, letting concern color her expression. "I regret I cannot be more helpful. Is the child missing from her family?" The addition of questions demonstrated cooperation, while subtly shifting dynamics. making him provide information rather than simply demanding it. King Brennan studied her face as she spoke. His golden eyes held hers with intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. Looking away would signal submission, and submission might be interpreted as guilt. She could feel him reading her, cataloging her elevated heart rate, the sweat fear produced, the micro-expressions that accompanied deception. Her body was betraying every word she spoke. If werewolf senses were as acute as stories suggested, her lies should be transparent. But something shifted in his expression as she finished. Some tension released from his shoulders. Some hardness softened fractionally around his jaw. He was, she realized with shock, choosing to accept her lie. Or pretending to accept it. "The child is my daughter," he said. And there was no missing the weight those words carried. "Princess Mira. She's been missing for 3 days. I'm concerned for her safety." Iris allowed her eyes to widen in what she hoped was convincing surprise. "Your daughter? Your Majesty? I'm very sorry. I'll certainly keep watch and report immediately if I see any sign of her." He studied her for a moment longer, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed in ways beyond her words. Then he inclined his head. "Thank you for your willingness to assist. I apologize for the disruption." The courtesy was formal, a king who understood that power still required occasional politeness. "I hope the search concludes successfully." He turned away, his attention moving to other areas of the square. The immediate pressure released, and Iris allowed herself the breath she had been holding. The danger had not passed. The search continued around her, soldiers examining spaces and questioning vendors. But the critical moment had been navigated without discovery. She maintained her composure as the search continued, greeting customers who approached, despite the unusual activity, conducting transactions with hands that trembled only slightly. The child beneath her table remained absolutely still, understanding instinctively that survival depended on silence. The minutes stretched into an hour. The soldiers completed their systematic examination without success. Their king watched with an expression that grew increasingly controlled as each potential hiding place was eliminated. Eventually, the search moved on. King Brennan issued commands, his soldiers obeyed with immediate precision. The party reformed and departed, leaving behind a market that gradually returned to its normal rhythms. Iris waited until she was certain they were truly gone, until whispers running through the crowd confirmed the royal party had left Willowmere entirely. Only then did she dare address the situation she had created. She made excuses to nearby vendors about closing early, packed her remaining merchandise with deliberately unhurried movements, and finally lifted the cloth that had concealed her small fugitive. The child looked up at her with eyes that held far more awareness than her age should have permitted. Golden depths, assessing the woman who had risked everything to protect her. She did not speak immediately, did not emerge from hiding, simply watched, waiting, gauging whether this human could be trusted. Iris made her decision with the same instinct that had guided her initial protection. She could not return this child without understanding why she had fled. She lifted the girl from the basket with gentle hands, settled her against one hip with practiced ease, and began the walk back to her apothecary. The market crowd parted around them without particular notice. A woman carrying a tired child was too common a sight to warrant attention. Her secret companion was hidden in plain view. The apothecary occupied a narrow building on a quiet street 2 blocks from the market square. Its front room served as shop, while the back contained living quarters that had housed 3 generations of her family. Iris carried the child inside, locked the door behind her, and continued into the private space where they could speak without interruption. She set the girl on a chair near the small fireplace, then busied herself preparing tea. The familiar ritual gave her hands something to do while her mind processed the impossible situation. She had harbored a fugitive from the king himself. She had lied to werewolf royalty. She had inserted herself into dynamics she had sworn never to touch again. The consequences could be catastrophic, but when she glanced at the child sitting small and frightened in her chair, golden eyes watching with wary hope, Iris found she could not regret her choice. The tea was ready before either spoke. 2 cups poured, though the child was young enough that water might have been more appropriate. Iris kept the girl's cup barely filled and settled into the chair across from her. She began with the simplest question. "What's your name?" The girl answered in a voice smaller than her earlier desperation might have suggested. Mira, my name is Mira Ashcroft. A pause, then with careful precision. Princess Mira Ashcroft, daughter of King Brennan and Queen Alara of the Northern Territories. The formal introduction confirmed what Iris had suspected but hoped might prove wrong. She had concealed a princess from her own father. She had committed an offense that could be interpreted as treason. Iris took a slow breath, centering herself. How old are you, Mira? 5 years, almost 6. Small hands wrapped around the teacup, seeking warmth. And the man searching for you, that was your father? Yes. The word emerged small and frightened. Then why, Iris asked gently, were you running from him? This was essential. The answer would determine whether her protection was justified. Mira's answer emerged slowly, fragments told by someone too young for coherent narrative, but old enough to understand importance. She spoke of a palace that had become cold after her mother died 2 years before. Of a father consumed by sorrow who withdrew, leaving her with caregivers who were sometimes unkind. Of being alone in a place that should have been home but felt like a prison. But then her voice dropped to a whisper, and what she said next changed everything. I was hiding, Mira said, eyes fixed on her cup. In the passages behind the walls. I'm not supposed to go there, but I like to hide when the palace feels too big. She took a shaky breath. I heard voices. Lord Corvus and General Thane. They were talking about Papa, about making him have an accident, about how I would be queen but Lord Corvus would control everything, and then her voice broke. Tears spilled down her small face. They said when I got older, I would have to disappear too, just like Mama. They said they were glad the poison finally worked on her. Iris felt ice form in her chest. What do you mean poison? They killed Mama, made it look like she just got sick. And they're going to kill Papa. And then they're going to kill me. Mira's tears came faster. So I ran away. During the journey, I told my nurse I needed to use the privy, and I just ran into the woods. I didn't know where to go. I just ran. The words carried the ring of truth. A child's testimony, perhaps easily dismissed. But Iris had grown up in palace politics. She recognized genuine conspiracy when she heard it. How long have you been running? 3 days. Maybe 4. I don't know anymore. Mira's voice was exhausted. I slept in the woods, ate berries, drank from streams. My feet hurt, and I'm so tired and I was so scared, but I couldn't stop, because if they found me, they'd take me back, and then Papa would die, and it would be my fault. The confession tumbled out, days of terror finally finding release. Iris reached across and took the child's hand. You're safe now, she said firmly. I won't let anyone hurt you. Even as she offered comfort, her tactical mind was racing. If what Mira said was true, the child had stumbled onto conspiracy at the highest levels. Lord Corvus, head of the Regent Council. General Thane, commander of the guard. If they had killed the queen and planned to kill the king, then Mira's life was worthless to them, except as temporary political tool. But something didn't fit. The king had been at the market searching for his daughter. He had seemed genuinely concerned. If he was in danger from conspirators, why search personally? Why not send others? Unless, understanding crashed over Iris like cold water. He had known. King Brennan had known his daughter was at her stall, had recognized her deception, had chosen, deliberately, to pretend he believed her. But why? The only answer that made sense was that he wanted Mira hidden, that he had somehow arranged for this outcome, that the conspiracy was real, but the king was not its ignorant victim. He was playing a deeper game. Mira, Iris said carefully, did you tell anyone what you heard before you ran? The child shook her head. I was too scared, I just ran. So the king had discovered the conspiracy through other means, had needed his daughter safe, but couldn't do it openly without alerting conspirators. And when Mira fled of her own accord, he had tracked her to Willowmere and then deliberately left her in Iris's protection. He had given his daughter to a stranger, because that stranger was the only person conspirators would overlook. It was brilliant, it was ruthless, it was exactly the tactical thinking that kept kings alive. It also meant Iris was now part of a game far more dangerous than she had imagined. She was not simply hiding a frightened child. She was safeguarding the heir while the king maneuvered against traitors. She looked at Mira, at the exhaustion and fear and desperate hope in those golden eyes. This child had lost her mother to poison, had overheard plans for her own murder, had survived 3 days alone in the wilderness because she thought it was the only way to save her father. And now she sat in a stranger's home, trusting that stranger with her life because she had no other options. Iris made her choice knowing it violated every principle of self-preservation. But some things mattered more than survival. "You can stay," she said, "until your father comes for you himself, until it's safe." Relief flooded Mira's face. "Really? You won't make me go back?" "Not until it's safe," Iris promised. "Your father is clearly searching. But if what you heard is true, the palace isn't safe right now. We need to give him time to deal with the conspirators." It was a careful way of saying what she believed, that King Brennan had deliberately allowed her to keep his daughter so he could focus on destroying threats, that the search had been performance, that the king was using her as unwitting protector. But Mira was too young for that complexity. What she needed was safety and stability. "Can I really stay?" the child asked again, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "You can really stay," Iris confirmed. Mira launched herself from her chair and wrapped small arms around Iris's waist, the same desperate grip from the market. But this time it was gratitude rather than terror. Iris held her and stroked her tangled hair and tried not to think about all the ways this could end in disaster. She had committed to protecting a werewolf princess from conspirators at the highest levels. She had inserted herself back into political dynamics she had sworn to avoid. It was madness, it was dangerous, it would probably get her killed. But as Mira clung to her and whispered broken thank yous, Iris discovered she could not bring herself to regret the choice. Some decisions were worth the consequences. Outside, the autumn sun was beginning its descent toward evening. The market would be closing, vendors packing wares and returning to homes where families gathered. Normal life continuing its rhythms, unchanged by the drama that had unfolded. But in the small apothecary, normal life had been suspended. A human healer had taken in a werewolf princess. A king had gambled his daughter's safety on a stranger's integrity. And the pieces of a conspiracy were moving toward collision that would determine the fate of thousands. Iris Whitmore, who had sworn never to involve herself in werewolf politics, held a frightened child and accepted that some promises were meant to be broken. The game had found her despite her best efforts to avoid it. Now she could only play her part and hope that the king who had trusted her knew what he was doing. Because if he was wrong, both she and Mira would pay the price. The wolf arrived at Iris's door as the moon rose on the evening of Mira's arrival. There was no knock, no warning, simply the presence of someone standing in the darkness beyond her threshold when she checked the locks before retiring for the night. Marcus Thornhart stood illuminated by lamplight spilling from inside the apothecary. He wore traveling clothes rather than military livery, his massive frame somehow managing to project both threat and restraint. His amber eyes found Iris with the precision of a tracker who had followed scent across difficult terrain. "May I come in?" His voice was low, respectful, but carried an undertone that suggested refusal would be unwise. Iris's hand tightened on the door handle. Behind her, deeper in the house, Mira was sleeping in the small bedroom that had belonged to Iris's parents. The child had finally collapsed from exhaustion after hours of nervous energy. "That depends," Iris said, keeping her voice steady despite fear that made her heart race, "on whether you're here to help or to take her away." Something that might have been approval flickered across Marcus's scarred face. "The king sent me ahead of the main search party. He wants to speak with you, but not at the palace. Too many ears. He's waiting at the inn on the eastern edge of town. The innkeeper has been compensated for discretion." Iris processed this with the tactical mind her father had trained. King Brennan wanted a secret meeting. Away from his territory, away from those he couldn't trust. It confirmed her deduction that he knew exactly where his daughter was. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "Because if I meant harm, you'd already be dead or bound," Marcus replied with brutal honesty. "I'm the king's beta, his oldest friend. I would die for him and I would kill for him. Right now, he's asked me to facilitate communication. That makes you valuable, which means you're safe from me." The logic was sound, if unsettling. Iris made her decision quickly. "I need to check on her first." She closed the door before he could respond, moved quickly to the bedroom. Mira was deeply unconscious, exhausted by 3 days of flight and fear. Iris covered her more securely, left a lamp burning low, and returned to the front. Marcus had not moved. He stood with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting, eyes constantly scanning for threats. "Lead the way," Iris said. They walked through Willowmere's quiet streets in silence. The town had settled into evening rhythms, most residents already abed. The inn Marcus led her to was modest but respectable, catering to traveling merchants and occasional werewolves conducting business in human territory. The innkeeper simply nodded when Marcus entered and gestured toward stairs leading to upper rooms. No questions asked, no curiosity shown, the kind of discretion that came from knowing when ignorance was survival. King Brennan waited in a chamber that was simple but clean. He stood when Iris entered, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her given their positions. He had changed from formal traveling clothes to something simpler, plain shirt and trousers that might belong to any working man. Without trappings of royalty, he looked younger, more human, though his golden eyes still carried the weight of command. "Thank you for coming," he said, and the courtesy was genuine. "I know you had no reason to trust Marcus, and every reason to fear this meeting." Iris remained standing near the door, conscious of Marcus positioning himself to block exit while maintaining non-threatening distance. The beta's presence was reminder that no matter how courteous the king seemed, this was still a predator's territory. "You knew," she said, deciding directness served her better than pretense. "At the market, you knew I was lying." Brennan's slight smile held no humor. "I could hear your heartbeat accelerate, smell the fear in your sweat, see the micro-expressions that accompany deception. Yes, I knew you were lying. And you let me keep her anyway." "I let you protect her," he corrected. "There's a difference." He gestured toward chairs. "Please sit, we have much to discuss." Iris considered refusing, but practicality won. She moved to the chair farthest from the king and sat with straight posture, hands folded, the bearing of someone who would not be intimidated despite being thoroughly outmatched. Brennan took the other chair, close enough for conversation but respecting her space. Marcus remained by the door, attention never wavering. "I need to know what Mira told you," Brennan said without preamble. "Everything she said about why she ran, what she feared, what she overheard." Iris met his eyes steadily. "Why should I tell you? For all I know, you're the threat she's running from." "If I were the threat, I would have taken her from your stall by force. I wouldn't be sitting here requesting information." His voice carried weariness. "But I understand your caution. It speaks well that you would protect a child even from her own father if you believed that father posed danger." He leaned back, a deliberate gesture of openness. "So let me tell you what I believe she overheard, and you can confirm or deny. That way you give nothing I haven't already deduced." Iris nodded slowly. "That's acceptable." "My daughter was hiding in the palace," Brennan began, his voice controlled. "Probably in the servant passages where she goes when she wants privacy. She overheard a conversation between Lord Corvus Nightshade, head of my regent council, and General Thane Blackwater, commander of my guard." He paused, reading Iris's reaction. She kept her expression neutral. "In that conversation, she heard them discussing plans to kill me, to make it appear accidental, probably during the coming conflict with northern packs. With me dead and Mira too young to rule, Corvus would become regent, controlling the kingdom in her name. And when she grew old enough to question his authority, she would meet an unfortunate fate." Iris felt her stomach clench at the casual way he described his daughter's planned murder. "She also heard them discuss my mate's death, heard confirmation that Queen Alara was poisoned, that Wolfsbane took months to kill her because she fought with every breath, that they were relieved when she finally died." Now emotion did creep into his voice, cold fury that made the air feel heavy. "Am I correct?" he asked. "Yes," Iris said quietly. "That's what she told me, nearly word for word." Brennan closed his eyes briefly. "Then she ran because she thought I was ignorant of the danger. She fled to protect me in the only way a 5-year-old could conceive, by removing herself as potential leverage." "She loves you," Iris said. "Despite confusion about your distance, she was trying to save you." "I know." The words were rough. "And I've failed her. But I was not ignorant of the conspiracy. I've known for 3 days. A servant loyal to my father brought information to Marcus. We've been investigating since." "But when Mira ran," Iris said, understanding crystallizing, "you used what she'd done rather than fight it." "Exactly." Brennan leaned forward. "Corvus and Thane believe Mira was taken by hostile forces. They think her disappearance connects to the coming war rather than their conspiracy. It gives me freedom I wouldn't have if they knew she simply fled." "And you left her with me because a human healer in a quiet town is the last place they'd look?" "Partly. But also because I investigated you. His golden eyes held hers. "I know who you are, Iris Whitmore. Your father Stefan served as royal physician to my father for 20 years. You grew up in palace corridors, trained in both medicine and court politics. You fled during the purge, lost your parents to violence meant for others." He paused, letting that knowledge settle. "And I know that despite every reason to hate werewolf politics, you saw a frightened child and chose to protect her without knowing who she was or what it might cost. That tells me your character." Iris found herself uncomfortable with the assessment. "I did what anyone decent would do." "No," Brennan said firmly. "Most would have looked away. You chose differently, which makes you exactly who I need." "Need for what?" "To keep my daughters safe while I destroy the men who killed my mate and threatened my child." His voice was steel. "The northern packs march within 2 weeks. Corvus and Thane will use the chaos to arrange my death. They expect me distracted, weakened. They're wrong." He stood and moved to the window, looking at quiet streets below. "I need Mira to stay here. Hidden. Safe. Beyond Corvus's reach. I need you to care for her, protect her, keep her alive while I do what must be done. When the kingdom is secure, when every traitor is dead, I'll come for her myself." He turned back. "I'm not ordering you. I can't. You're not my subject. I'm asking. Will you help me save my daughter and my kingdom?" The question hung weighted with implications. This was not simple childcare. This was conscription into political war where stakes were measured in lives. Every instinct screamed refusal. To give Mira back, walk away, return to safety and obscurity. She had paid enough for werewolf politics. Her parents were dead because of games played by creatures whose power she could never match. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Mira's face. Remembered desperate grip of small arms. Recalled terror in golden eyes that should never have known such fear. Some debts were owed not to individuals but to decency itself. "I'll keep her safe," Iris heard herself say. "Until you come yourself. Until the kingdom is secure." Relief crossed Brennan's features. "You'll be compensated. Funds for her care, replacement for lost business." "I don't want payment." "Nevertheless, you'll have it. Not as payment, but because Mira's care requires resources. Accept it as practicality." The logic was sound. Iris nodded acceptance. "There's more," Brennan said. "Marcus will stay in Willowmere. Not in your home, that would draw attention, but close enough to respond if danger threatens. He'll serve as liaison and additional protection." Iris glanced at Marcus, who inclined his head. "I can accept that. One more thing." Brennan's expression grew serious. "Mira cannot know I'm aware of her location. She needs to believe she's truly hiding, that you're protecting her from me as well as conspirators. If she thinks I've sanctioned this, she might relax vigilance. Children talk, and talk can reach wrong ears. You want me to lie to your daughter. I want you to maintain her security by allowing her to believe what she already believes." He held her gaze. "Can you do that?" It was manipulation, using his daughter's fear to ensure silence. But it was also tactically sound. "Yes," Iris said, "I can do that." "Then we have understanding." Brennan moved back to the table, pulled a sealed envelope from inside his shirt, and placed it before Iris. "This contains instructions for Marcus, emergency protocols if you need to flee, codes for secure communication, and a letter, sealed with my signet, granting you authority to act in my daughter's name if circumstances require." Iris picked up the envelope, feeling weight of wax and paper and responsibility. "What circumstances?" "The kind I hope never arise," Brennan said grimly. "But if something happens to me, if the conspiracy succeeds, you'll need documentation to prove Mira's identity and your authority to protect her." He was preparing for his own death, making arrangements for his daughter's survival in a world where he might not exist. "You think you might lose," she said quietly. "I think I'd be a fool not to prepare for every possibility." Brennan's smile was sharp. "But no, I don't think I'll lose. Corvus and Thane are politicians and schemers. I'm a warrior. When blood starts flowing, elaborate plans collapse." He moved toward the door, Marcus stepping aside, but Brennan paused at the threshold. "My daughter is the most precious thing in my world. I'm trusting you with her life. If you prove worthy of that trust, you'll have a king's gratitude. If you betray it..." He let the sentence hang. "I won't betray her," Iris said firmly. "Whatever happens between you and your enemies, Mira will be safe." Brennan studied her face, then nodded once. "I believe you. That's why I chose you." He left without further ceremony, Marcus following. Iris remained seated, envelope heavy in her hands, processing the commitment she had made. She had agreed to harbor a princess during conspiracy, to lie to that princess about her father's knowledge, to potentially raise the girl if the king fell. 7 years ago, she had sworn never to involve herself in werewolf politics. That promise had lasted until a frightened child ran into her arms. The walk back was solitary and cold, frost forming on cobblestones, Willowmere sleeping peacefully, unaware that the quiet healer now protected a princess whose survival might determine kingdom's fate. When Iris returned and checked on Mira, the child was still sleeping, small face finally peaceful. Iris stood watching her breathe. This tiny creature who had become center of conspiracies and counter-conspiracies. She thought about King Brennan, about careful control when he spoke of his daughter, about cold fury when he mentioned his dead mate. He was dangerous, that was clear. But he was also a father fighting to protect his child with the only tools he possessed. Iris could respect that even as she feared it. She settled into the chair beside Mira's bed, pulling a blanket over her shoulders, prepared to keep vigil. Sleep would not come easily knowing she had committed to a path with no clear destination. But some paths chose you. All you could do was walk them with courage and hope that when you reached the end, you could live with choices made. In Thornhaven Palace, King Brennan returned to find his war room exactly as he had left it. Maps spread across ancient oak, markers representing forces and territories, the calculated geography of coming conflict. But now he moved pieces with renewed purpose. Mira was safe, hidden where Corvus would never think to look, protected by a woman whose loyalty had been earned through appeal to fundamental decency. One vulnerability secured. Now he could focus entirely on the game itself. Marcus entered as Brennan repositioned markers on northern approaches. The beta closed the door and engaged the lock, ensuring privacy. "She'll protect her," Marcus said without preamble. The way that woman looked at Mira, like she was already prepared to die for her, that's rare. "I know," Brennan said quietly. "That's why I chose her. Not skill or power or connection, but because she cares. Dangerous quality in our world. In any world, but particularly ours." Brennan placed a final marker and stepped back. "Send word to our contacts in the northern packs. Exact numbers, exact timeline. I want to know their plans before they finalize them." "Already done," Marcus replied. "Our scouts report they'll march in 12 days. 3,000 wolves, well supplied, prepared for extended campaign. And Corvus? Playing his role perfectly, advocating for negotiation in council, arguing we should seek peace rather than fight, making himself appear reasonable while you appear inflexible." Marcus's tone held disgust. "Half the council agrees with him." "Let them," Brennan said. "Let Corvus build support. Let him believe he's maneuvering me into impossible position. The higher his confidence, the harder he'll fall." "And Thane? Still positioning his people. I've been watching duty assignments. He's placing his most loyal fighters in key positions, the ones who'll follow orders when time comes." Brennan's smile was cold. "He's being obvious if you know what to look for." Marcus moved beside his king, studying the map with a soldier's eye. "We could arrest them now, present evidence, execute them, and be done." "We could," Brennan acknowledged. "But that would solve immediate problem while leaving underlying weakness. Corvus and Thane are symptoms, not disease. The disease is that my mourning made the kingdom appear vulnerable, made ambitious men believe they could take what they wanted. Arresting 2 conspirators doesn't cure that. You're going to let them make their attempt. I'm going to let them think they're making their attempt," Brennan corrected. "The northern packs will attack. Corvus will push for negotiations that weaken my position. Thane will arrange for me to die heroically, probably saving some soldiers so I look like martyr rather than victim. It's well planned. It might work if I didn't know." He turned from the map. "But I do know. And when they spring their trap, they'll discover I've laid one of my own. Corvus will find allies suddenly unwilling to support obvious treason. Thane will discover soldiers he thought loyal actually serve me. And northern packs will learn attacking a kingdom they thought weak was their last mistake." "How many will die?" Marcus asked quietly. "Fewer than if I show weakness now and invite continuous challenges. More than if the world were just and conspiracies could be solved with words." Brennan's expression held weariness. "Enough to make the lesson permanent. Not so many we can't recover." Marcus nodded, understanding. This was leadership's burden, the arithmetic of acceptable losses. The calculation of how much blood purchased how much peace. When do we begin? We already have, Brennan replied. From the moment Mira fled. From the moment I left her in Iris's care. From the moment I returned and began moving pieces, the game has been in motion. Now we play it through. He placed his palm on the map, covering Thornhaven. I will destroy the men who killed my mate. I will break the pacts that thought to exploit my grief. I will rebuild this kingdom into something Mira can inherit without fear. And when it's done, when every threat is ash and every traitor is bones, I'll bring my daughter home and teach her what it means to rule with both strength and wisdom. A worthy goal, Marcus said. The only goal, Brennan corrected. Everything else is means to that end. They stood together in the war room, King and Beta, friends who had been brothers in all but blood since boyhood. Outside, the palace continued its routines, servants completing tasks, nobles retiring, guards beginning night patrols, the machinery of power turning eternally. None knew that in this chamber, beneath their feet, decisions were being made that would reshape the kingdom. That the king they had dismissed as diminished was orchestrating their destruction with precision. They would learn soon enough. In the darkness, Brennan allowed himself one moment of vulnerability. One acknowledgement of the fear beneath careful control. If I fail, he said quietly, if they kill me despite everything, you get Iris and Mira out. Take them far from here. Give my daughter a life away from this blood and politics. You won't fail, Marcus said with certainty. But if I do, if you do, I'll protect her with my last breath. You know that. I know. Brennan's hand clenched against the map. But I don't intend to give you opportunity. I've lost too much. I won't lose her too. Then we ensure you don't. Simple words, weighted with oath and intention. Marcus had followed Brennan into battles where death was certain, and victory was hope disguised as strategy. He would stand beside him now, in this quieter, but no less deadly conflict. Get some rest, Brennan said. Tomorrow we begin the performance. I need to appear exhausted, distracted. I need Corvus to believe his plan is working. And you? Brennan's smile held no warmth. I'll sleep when the traitors are dead. Marcus departed, leaving his king alone with maps and strategies and cold calculations. Brennan returned to planning, moving markers and adjusting positions, gaming scenarios until candles burned low and the palace fell silent. He thought about Mira, safe in a human town, protected by a woman who had every reason to hate werewolves but chose compassion. He thought about Alara, slowly dying from poison while he mourned too deeply to notice. He thought about the men who had killed her and now plotted against him and his daughter. And he made promises in the darkness. I will make this right. I will destroy our enemies. I will build you a kingdom worth inheriting. I will be the father you deserve and the king this realm requires. I will not fail again. The promises were vows to himself as much as to them. Commitments written between intention and action, where all great changes began. The game was in motion. The pieces were moving. And before the next moon waxed full, the board would run red, and the kingdom would remember why his bloodline had endured. In Willowmere, in a small bedroom above an apothecary, a child slept peacefully, unaware of battles planned in her name. And beside that child, keeping vigil in darkness, a human healer who had sworn to avoid werewolf politics kept watch over a princess whose survival might determine thousands of fates. The game had begun, now came the blood.